From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined as always with our super producer, Dylan, the Tennessee Pal Fagan. Most importantly, you are you. You are here. That makes this the stuff they don't want you to know in a rare two-part episode. We are diving into the darkly disturbing, the frankly terrifying story of something called the Ludlow Massacre. And when we're talking off air, we realized that this had to be a two-part episode because there was so much to get to, especially the aftermath and implications.
Yeah, there's a ton of details here. We recorded for like an hour 40 or something overall on this episode.
Yeah.
It's a long conversation.
It goes in a lot of directions. We all have a lot to say about this. We also, I almost said exhort. We plead with you, fellow conspiracy realists, to check out episode 1 or part 1 of this episode before you dive into episode 2.
Well, yeah, because the context is everything, and then applying that context and these specific things that occurred back in 1914 to 2024, and just what we're going through now. This is important stuff.
100%. So let's jump right back into this episode on the Ludlow Massacre, already in progress.
Look, the Baldwin Felts folks got up to some pretty nasty stuff, especially in the tent colonies, including Ludlow, but including other tent colonies, because there were multiple. They would have these big searchlights, and they would wait until late at night, and they would just roam the searchlights around the tents. Again, these are canvas tents, so the whole tent lights up. They built a special evil car, an armored car called the Death Special that had a machine gun mounted on it. And they would drive by the edges of the camp and just rat-a-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat through the windows or through the tent.
I don't think it's this exact agency that's depicted, but a lot of this kind of behavior is very well kind of dramatized in that Woody Guthrie movie I was talking about, Bound for Glory.
Yeah, and I can see it, and that comes from, these very real events. They were also detaining people. They were doing sniper attacks sometimes on folks who might be Union leadership, and at the whole time,
assassinations.
Most of this is intimidation. You can see that's what they're doing, but some of it is I'm assuming going after lives.
Yeah, people died, and then at the same time, the so-called scab workers, we have to give them a moment. They're like anybody else. They're just trying to have a job, and they've probably already traversed hundreds of miles, probably in an immigration situation or leaving, a very dangerous rural situation. They're saying, I'm not the enemy, but the Union is saying, if you're not with us, then you're against us. And so there are also fatal confrontations between union workers on strike and the so-called scabs. So this is very dirty business all around. This is the dawn of something that is much larger in scope. It's called the Colorado Coalfield War. Again, not in your history textbooks, at least in grade school. Or if you had, I don't know, if you somehow had Howard Zinn at your career day.
Yeah.
Do you think he does or did career days?
Sure. That'd
be cool. I would do. I miss doing career days. I used to do them all the time. Have you guys ever done one?
I haven't. I mean, I participated in one on the, student end of it when I was a kid, but that'd be a lot of fun. I would love to go and talk about the wonderful world of podcasting.
You guys can come with me next time if you want.
Where do you do this?
I've done single days at a school, like a career talk. Hey, let's talk to this guy. Tell us about your job, Dad.
No one invited me.
Damn.
I do those things. I've been doing those for a long time. And, once you accept that you are never going to be the most popular career day guest, then it's a wonderful opportunity. It's a really cool hang. the most popular guest is always the guy with the fire truck.
Boom.
The fire truck, he runs the game. He is the Rockefeller of career day. He or she. Yeah.
Do you make like a poster, a trifold poster board? It says like podcasts, the future of radio.
The first time I did it, I played some videos that we had worked on, and I gave out a bunch of How Stuff Works swag.
Nice.
Or the first time I did it for this occupation. And, you know, if you got the swag, then you got the crowd. In grade school, at least. It probably works in college, too, right? Who doesn't want a free T-shirt?
Shot glasses that just say, listen to the cast, like and subscribe.
Shot glasses?
Yeah, for the college kids.
Oh, okay. Well, you know, if we get a price break on the shot glasses, maybe we can get away with it in grade school. Like, give this to your parents.
Mm-hmm.
What could go wrong? That's the question Colorado Governor Elias M. Ammons asked when this violence is continuing to escalate. And again, you know, the story is often explained in terms of the men who are working as miners or working for this detective agency or these local guards. But we have to remember there were many more women and children, right? The population is much bigger than it sounds when you hear some of these round numbers. The governor calls in the Colorado National Guard, yes, a militia, on October 28th. And at first, the guard seemed kind of calm, but later evidence would show that the guard troopers were, in fact, a lot of them being paid under the table by Colorado Fuel and Iron.
Gee, that's weird. How could that happen?
I mean, think of it this way, like the Dave & Buster's example. So we're in that Dave & Buster's company town. We strike and we say, pay us dollars, and then the Atlanta Police Department comes in, or the Georgia troopers come in, as a better example, and they crack down on us, and it turns out that they're getting paid by Dave & Buster's.
Dave, why?
Buster, no.
Your name is so fun.
No.
An example of this would be the adjutant, there we go, general for the National Guard on the case, John Chase. John Chase has, similar to Baldwin Felt, he has a reputation for breaking strikes. About a decade earlier, he was involved during the Cripple Creek strike, which is its own bag of badgers. And there are a couple of inciting events, right? And these kind of things, you always look for what the pivotal moment is, right? What is the casus belli, or belly? On March 10th, 1914, one of the scab worker bodies is found on the railroad tracks near Forbes, Colorado. And Forbes also has a tent colony, a little smaller than Ludlow. What happens when they find the body?
So the guard blamed the strikers, which, Matt, you made the point off mic that certainly would be an obvious first choice, first line of questioning, given the controversy and the fact that there's no love lost between the union members and these quote unquote scabs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so they decide to retaliate, and
they go in and they just talk to people, right? Calmly.
Well, they would have if they were worried about what we call proportional response, but they're not. Instead, they completely destroy the nearby tent colony over in Forbes. The strikers are just further galvanized by this because usually in these situations, you'll see a growth in unity and commitment to a cause before you break the back, right? And so the violence escalates. It's 1914, and Colorado Fuel and Iron is starting to run their numbers, their Q2 or Q3 numbers, and they say, it's actually getting too expensive for us to maintain these troops. And so in step with the politicians, the governor, they decrease the amount of National Guard on the ground. And this results in an increase in violence because now more of those fatal conflicts can occur.
Yep. And then on Sunday, April 19th, so that's like just a month and change afterwards, in 1914, the National Guard creates a big circle around the camp. So they're stationed all around the camp. Basically, there's no way to run, no direction out of the camp you can run without running past some National Guardsmen. And they also install a machine gun. So we're talking like military grade weapons on a bluff above the camp, so overlooking the camp. Basically, if anything happens down there, this machine gun can probably reach you with its bullets.
A higher elevation. So yeah, let's step back a little, because I like that we're pointing out there's a murkiness to it. The climax of this part of the war is at that Ludlow tent colony. It's April 19th when they install the machine gun. Wee hours, almost April 20th. The next day, the National Guard does attack. To that earlier point, no one's sure exactly what instigated the violence, but the most popular account you can find in historical records says that the day after some members of the colony celebrated the Orthodox Easter, 3 guardsmen approached the camp. So there's no firing yet. And they say, hey, you're holding someone against their will. Let them go. Go fish. We don't have the person you're looking for. The leader of the camp is a guy named Louis Tikas, Tikas, and he gets an offer from these guardsmen at the same time. They say, hey, come meet us about a half-mile away in Ludlow Village. This is getting out of control, right? Yeah. Just for the good of the families, let's talk truce. So come meet our leader, Major Patrick J. Hamrock. Dumb last name. It's his real last name.
Right. Maybe a little nominative determinism there, too. And they meet at a train station in Ludlow Village, about a half mile from the colony. And while this meeting was going down, 2 separate militias, the ones running that machine gun, take positions, strategic positions along a rail route about a half a mile south of Ludlow. It's not almost like they're laying the groundwork for an ambush, right?
So at the same time, simultaneously, concurrently, there are miners, Union miners who are armed, Greek miners, and they begin flanking this other arroyo. And when 2 of the militia forces' explosions occur, later we'll learn, outside the fog of war, these are detonated to draw support from National Guard units. And these explosions alert the Ludlow tent colony. Most of the people have heard, 3 National Guards are here, right?
Yeah.
And have seen someone trying to make that siege perimeter, but they don't really know what's happening. So they hear the explosions. The miners, who at this point are pretty well militarized themselves, they take up positions at the bottom of the hill, right? So again, the elevation here is a big factor. The militia opens fire, and then hundreds of miners, their families, they run for cover. Chaos is reigning. 3 of the strike leaders, including Tikas, are captured and killed by the Guard. It very much does seem like the Guard lied to him. They conspired to lure Tikas out and never intended to make a truce.
I mean, there's accounts that just say they're shot and they're left where they died, right? They just left their bodies there. They didn't do anything ceremoniously. They didn't pick up their bodies and take them to, whatever hospital or, whatever medical assistance there was there. They just shot them and their bodies fell.
Yeah. The bodies hit the floor. The strikers are outgunned, and they're exercising guerrilla tactics, but they run out of ammo.
With that, let's take a quick break, hear a word from our sponsors, and return with more on the Ludlow Massacre. And we're back.
And so a lot of people retreat to the countryside, right, to gather forces and figure out their next step. A lot of women and children, because they've already had the siege mentality, a lot of women and children hide in cellars that have been dug beneath these canvas tents.
Because there are bullets flying, right?
Right. And these are not the fancy pants cellars of old New England. These are holes in the ground. The Guard responds by dousing the tents in kerosene and setting them aflame.
And the big question for history here is how aware were they that most of these tents had something dug beneath them because of the cold that we talked about? One of the main ways to get away from that cold is to go a bit underground. And did any of those National Guardsmen know? It seems like one person could have raised their hand and said, hey, whoa. But again, this is a big movement. These are a lot of National Guardsmen doing this. It's not one or two dousing with kerosene and then setting fires. It's going through and systematically clearing this tent.
The banality of evil, which we discussed earlier. I was just following orders. Yeah, we have to remember the National Guard here is pulled from people who are loosely familiar with the area. It was not an uncommon practice, especially in inclement weather, to dig into the ground like that. So it is possible that they didn't know or didn't think about it in the heat of the conflict, but it begs probability,
right,
to say that it didn't occur once. I mean, especially in just one cellar alone, there were 11 children and 2 women found burned and suffocated to death. Their bodies so mangled that it's impossible to know which of these torturous events actually killed them.
Yeah. But it's likely that just the flames above them filling that cellar with smoke got to them first.
Sucking the oxygen out as well. Yeah.
So are you saying they thought the tents were empty because they weren't aware of the dugout cellars, or it's by design? Like, I mean, they were intending to burn people alive, basically, right? Or
It is cartoonishly unlikely that they would not have thought about people having cellars dug under the tents. It is incredibly unlikely.
Where do they think they were? Like, I mean, I just don't,
I mean, I agree with you. It's hard for me to come to grips with knowing how bad of a situation it would be for the company.
Right, that's true.
Once word gets out that women and children were massacred, burned alive like that. So it's hard for me to grasp, like, well, was it on purpose? Was it an accident? Or was it just oversight? Or, I mean, are they trying to send a message to the striking miners, we'll kill your family?
At least some of them had to know, because this is burn the village to save the village type stuff. This is insidious kind of total war. Because you're removing the infrastructure. I mean, in total, the massacre resulted in 25 deaths, 3 of whom were National Guard troops. And there was media on the scene. There were photographs of the tent colonies, because this tension had been rising for a while in the Colorado Coalfield War. There are reports you could see on the ground about this from a New York Times reporter talking about that a bit off air. So the deaths were a matter of national interest. The rest of the country knew about this, and most people blamed John D. Rockefeller Jr. because, for years, this guy has not really cared about where his money's coming from. He's out in some fancy pants part of New York, and he's just saying, more coal, bring me more coal. And that's actually pretty close to what he was doing.
Well, and to your point, Matt, at this point, it becomes a major optics problem, like a major PR disaster. And that's more the issue than the actual lives lost, as far as the company is concerned. I would argue. I mean, of course, they're going to, in their PR response, probably address the egregious oversight and the overzealousness of National Guardsmen and how, their hearts are with the families. But, it's all kind of smoke and mirrors, if you ask me.
Thoughts and prayers, right? Are you guys okay if I read just one short excerpt from this New York Times article?
Of course.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
April 21st, the day after the massacre, 1914. Quote, just so you get a sense, imagine you're a member of the public, right? You've never been to Colorado. This is how you're learning about this. The Ludlow camp is a mass of charred debris, and buried beneath it is a story of horror unparalleled in the history of industrial warfare. In the holes which had been dug for their protection against the rifle's fire, the women and children died like trapped rats when the flames swept over them.
Ooh.
Now, you're just somebody in Florida reading this, right? You're just somebody on the West Coast or in Chicago or something. This is how you're learning about the disastrous, heartbreaking result here that comes entirely from corporate corruption.
Well, and it's stuff like this that really demonstrates the power of the press and like how important it is for that poetic description to go around, painfully poetic description, where it really starts to make people understand the stakes and almost, for the first time, perhaps see the evil of the situation.
Yeah.
I want to call out our source here just because we're talking about how the Internet Archive is down, and it's really hard to locate that actual New York Times article unless you're going to a place to find it.
You can see a great compilation from PBS, right? American Experience.
Yeah, exactly. So you can look up PBS, American Experience, Rockefellers, the Ludlow Massacre, and you can find that specific excerpt that we just read, but there's also all kinds of other interesting stuff in there. In a couple of New York Times articles from 1914 that you can find, but they are mostly a part of the aftermath with like the Rockefellers coming through and trying to, I guess, spin this a little bit.
Yeah, it's the PR stuff I was talking about earlier. Yeah, it's a different conspiracy, right? And you can see in there also Rockefeller's timeline where he appears to be rethinking things, also speaks with Congress. America is watching this in rage, in astonishment, and you don't have to be pro-union, right? Not everybody was pro-union back then, right? Then as now. You don't have to be pro-union to object to the indiscriminate murder of civilians. And these folks aren't doing anything wrong. They're not a threat to the law enforcement or the militia. They're literally hiding in the ground and trying not to die.
Well, and again, to see so starkly that something is very, very broken in this system and that something has to change.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's the idea. Something must be done. And it continues. The aftermath of this massacre, even though the public already knows about it, is even worse. This is followed by something called the 10-Day War, which is, again, part of the larger Colorado Coalfield War. So miners are retaliating for this massacre. A lot of these people have lost family members, right? Friends that barely survived. And they say, look, it's on site, right? The time for speaking has passed. We are attacking anti-union town officials. We're attacking strike breakers, the overseers, the people who are running the mines. They take control of an area about 50 miles long, 5 miles wide. All in all, 50 people die during this 10-day war. And ultimately it reaches a guy named Woodrow Wilson, who did a couple other things, but one time he was U.S. president.
Also, not particularly popular when it comes to super producer Max Williams of the Ridiculous History podcast.
Yep.
Yeah.
Guy was kind of a pill.
Yeah. I like the name Woodrow, but I think he kind of ruined it for everybody.
Oh, funny. His boyhood home is actually in my hometown of Augusta, Georgia, and I once lived on the corner of Woodrow and Wilson.
Yeah,
whoa!
That's one of those things where so much stuff in the neighborhood gets named after the guy. Like there's a small town in Tennessee where I want to say it was Johnson or Jackson, but there's a town. We'll follow up on this later. There's a town where everything is named after that guy. It's a small town. I only know about it because I have family living there. And if you ask the people who live there, like, hey, you guys sure like this president? They all say, no, it's just the only thing our town is known for.
Oh, wow.
So he's unpopular. But
there's
popular.
a street right around where I live called General Lee.
Mm-hmm.
They'll get to it eventually, man.
Well, as we were talking about it earlier, they don't specify which General Lee.
Yeah, it could be anybody.
So you got that. It could be, like a law about a Russian president. Just any General Lee.
It's just named after generally the name Lee.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Specifically is a different cul-de-sac. But the
perhaps Lady Gaga's character from the new Joker film.
I'm gonna skip it, I think. But okay, so the president, Woodrow Wilson, makes the decision to send in federal troops. Luckily, these troops are paid by the U.S. government, actually, and not by corporate mining interests. So they're able to somewhat quell the disaster. And strike negotiations reach an ending point. They end peacefully on December 10th of that same year, but the strikers don't really get any of those 7, again, very reasonable demands they made in the first place. A lot of them go to get arrested.
Yeah, and 400 of them go to trials, which last until 1920, though none were convicted.
That's so crazy to me. All this strife, all this loss of life, all of the, I didn't mean to rhyme that, you guys, but all of this terrible stuff happened. And the strikers don't get anything. And then the state and the country attempt to take all these people to court and nobody gets convicted. Just what was it for? I mean,
absolutely nothing.
Right.
Jeez.
Yeah. It also, we also see that there was one guy, a fellow leader of the strike called John R. Lawson. He's convicted of murder, but eventually, once the story moves from the headlines, his conviction is overturned. There were some like 22 National Guardsmen originally in trouble. They were going to be court-martialed. They got exonerated. Congress held a bunch of hearings and didn't do anything.
Jeez, man.
What were the charges against some of these miners? That they were like being accused of inciting a riot or of like, openly firing on the people who were firing on them, which I would argue is self-defense.
Murder, assault, vandalism, destruction of property, maybe theft in some cases.
But similar to the Leonard Peltier story we were talking about, where it's like just because you have a government agency descending on you and firing on you does not make their cause legitimate. And it's at a certain point they are coming for your life and you have to defend yourself and not think about the fact that it's a government subsidized or perhaps even part of the government. I mean, this is the National Guard we're talking about here, right?
The Colorado, yeah.
All right, let's take a quick pause here, hear a word from our sponsor, and then come back to the Ludlow Massacre. And we have returned. Let's jump right back in.
Okay, now we know there's one big thing that's on all of our minds, fellow conspiracy realists. Whatever happened to this poor Rockefeller guy? You know what I mean? He went through so much.
I know, poor guy.
He had to write letters.
Take a letter.
He talks to Congress, right, dictated but not read by Rockefeller Jr. He does make some tangible improvements. Ultimately, though, he decides to make his own company-sponsored union.
What does that mean?
Alternative.
What does that mean?
It means classic capitalism.
Yeah.
Sure, but like, I mean, it's just kind of lip service, right? I mean,
it evolves
Understood.
to a better form. But in the beginning, it makes me think of one of my favorite lines about capitalism. Capitalism is the one ideology that figured out if you see someone say screw capitalism, you can print it on a t-shirt and sell that t-shirt to them.
Yeah.
There you go. I want to read this statement before we get to this last thing that we're going to say here about John D. Rockefeller. This is a statement that he made in June of 1914. So massacre occurs in April. This is in June of 1914. This is what Rockefeller stated happened. He says, "There was no Ludlow Massacre. The entanglement started as a desperate fight for life by two small squads of militia against the entire tent colony. There were no women or children shot by the authorities of the state or representatives of the operators. While this loss of life is profoundly to be regretted, it is unjust in the extreme to lay it at the door of the defenders of law and property, who were in no slightest way responsible for it." That thought of the defenders of law and property, doesn't that strike you guys as like representing what police forces are?
The American dream, baby.
Defenders of law and property.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've spoken about this before, sort of the legal standing or prioritization of law enforcement, right? It comes up pretty often in protest. And
Yeah. Well, the good guys are the landowners and the company owners, right?
Mhm.
I mean, at least in this worldview that he puts out there in June of 1914.
And it comes back again in just like in that time and in this time and in recent years. It will always come up because it is a dilemma of philosophic perspective, right? Everybody wants to be the main character. Nobody wants to be the bad guy, right? And that is an argument Rockefeller makes, and he realizes that there is another war afoot, another conflict that a lot of people aren't thinking about in terms of what it is, which is an optics war, a war of information and narrative. And this is where we see a very strange era in public relations. Our buddy Johnny D brings in a PR expert. He's saying, oh, the peasants hate me, not only in Colorado, but abroad. And he contacts this really innovative mover and shaker. I'm not being sarcastic. Very smart person named Ivy Lee. And Ivy Lee says, look, we need an optics campaign, Johnny. You need to go to Colorado yourself, and I need media there. I need them to take pictures of you shaking the hands, kissing the babies, hanging out at a church social.
Shaking the babies, kissing the hands.
Yeah, we need, don't shake them too hard. We need to also have some people write a glowing, kind of homespun exploration of your time. And, a picture of you hearing grievances and responding to those. If we could get you on a home tour, we'll find you some Rockefeller-friendly families to walk with and go through the facilities. The media loved it. Look, said America, the dead so quickly forgotten. Old Johnny D's just like us. We're not so different, you and I.
Jeez.
It worked.
Should we read another excerpt from The Visit that we've got from September 20th, 1915? When Rockefeller's out there talking to the men and women who run his iron and coal company. We are all partners in a way that we were like alluding to.
Yeah.
Do you want to would you mind doing that? I think you do awesome.
Well, thank you, Matt. I'm honored.
Bless us with your reading.
To play too much hype to play the villain here. Who didn't see himself as a villain.
We are all partners in a way. Capital can't get along without you men. And you men can't get along without capital. When anybody comes along and tells you that capital and labor can't get along together, that man is your worst enemy. We are getting along friendly enough here in this mine right now, and there's no reason why you men cannot get along with the managers of my company when I am back in New York.
Goodness my gracious. How patrician, man. That was
just like the corporate structuring of it too. Where he's baking in answers to questions, like, I'm not going to be here.
Yeah. But look how great we're getting along when Daddy's here. When Daddy goes home, and you guys can get along and play just fine.
It does have that energy, right? It does seem too that people thought, although we're cracking on him and he deserves it, it does seem that people thought he was making good faith efforts. And I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I mean, there were improvements made. The only counterpoint to it is that and you kind of alluded to this earlier, Ben, the way it functions in capitalism, when something like this occurs, there are slight improvements. You push the needle just enough, right? Now the new standard is there. But it's only moved slightly.
And it takes something of this magnitude to even get that slight movement, which is just so frustrating.
Yeah, you need an act of Congress. You need a major event. You need something to occur where everybody can look at it and say, oh, well, we need at least that. Right? And it's always at least that.
Yeah, and the Overton window shifts again, right? And not for nothing, will some of the more cynical of us in the crowd say, isn't this like the old story about the trees who kept voting for the axe to be president of the forest? The forest got smaller and smaller, but the trees would get together and they would say, the axe isn't perfect, but that handle's wooden. He's kind of like us.
Oh, God.
Yeah, that's an old one. It's an antique.
That one hurts. Okay.
Yeah. And I guess we have to ask too, like, obviously, folks, we've made this a two-parter. We know it's a little longer than usual, but we hope you find it worth your time. It's obviously very important to us as well. And we have to ask what this tells us about the modern day. I hope I haven't over-salted the soup. That doesn't make sense. All right.
Sure,
that might be a one-off.
Nobody likes a salty soup.
But we might have mentioned it too much, but do we see some parallels here or some potential parallels?
Oh, well, how could you? Of course. It sums the whole thing up, and it's just the struggle continues. We mentioned the sugar industry and how very, very, very similarly dangerous conditions and labor camp type scenarios still exist to this day. So that micro movement that you're talking about, Matt, I mean, it's still slow even to this day. And also, I was going to mention earlier, like, it is technically illegal for companies to retaliate against, unionizing workers on paper. But, I have a dear friend who was recently on strike, in the legal profession in New York City. And when he returned from strike, there was very clear retaliatory action taking place because it's easy to hide it behind other actions, and it's hard to prove. And the advantage remains on the side of the companies, I think we could all argue.
Well, also, to that point, this acquaintance of mine as well, and you're talking about proving retaliation means proving intent. And intent is very difficult to prove, especially when there are so many other things you could throw up at the screen as the quote-unquote reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, in the news, as we're recording this, on October 3rd, the International Longshoremen's Association just came to terms, and that's 45,000 human beings who work in ports like all along the Gulf Coast and the East Coast of the United States. They were going to strike, and that was going to be a massive deal for the United States of America. And we were talking about this offline a lot. We mentioned it, I think, in a Strange News, but we were just mentioning the effects that would have on little things like our ability to get paper towels, right?
Toilet paper. Yeah.
And fresh fruit and things like that. And it would have massive effects on the lives of everybody, these 45,000 people who are represented by this one union. But thankfully, they came to a deal negotiated that basically said, we're going to postpone our strike until, I think, mid-January of 2025. So let's get this deal done, or you guys, the United States basically is in trouble.
Right. At least go to the negotiating table. And that leads us to the other question, has the era of the Pinkerton passed?
Well, that I think so. Yeah, you can't crack skulls anymore. It's just
in this country.
Yeah, the optics of it are just too damaging, because of public opinion and all of that stuff. So, I mean, they have to tread more lightly, and a lot of these anti-union, anti-labor practices, I think the most egregious and outward ones we see are by companies like Amazon and their warehouse employees and things like that. But my point is they have to be a little more sneaky about it.
Yeah, that was my question. Has the age of the Pinkerton passed, or has it simply evolved? And if it has passed, to your point, then for how long? Is it a permanent passage, or is it another cyclical iteration? Because I think we see that these things come and go over time. I don't think I don't think it's impossible that these kind of tactics might return. We know they still happen in other parts of the world, in other countries. You don't have to look far to see the merc squads that certain energy interests will hire, up to and including overthrowing a duly elected government.
Yeah, and then we also know that as the individuals and parties and what have you who hold power kind of shift, it's possible to roll that stuff back, whether it be oversight of industry regulations and things like that can be rolled back. You're not wrong, Ben. I do see a future given a radical enough shift, maybe not even that radical, where things like this sort of labor protection could shift as well.
Guys, we need a new version of The Wire. Looking at you, David Simon, we need a new version that shows all this stuff from the longshoremen to the tycoons in New York City. Just this shows all of this stuff working together.
That one season of The Wire, though, was the first time I really understood the inner workings of longshoremen and a lot of that kind of stuff. The dock workers there in Baltimore. It's a really good point. Simon is really great at kind of explaining the intricacies of these kinds of relationships and where the power structures and all the different, involved parties kind of lie. It's a really smart guy.
Well, what does it look like now? And to Ben, to your point, what does that look like when there are android law enforcement officers patrolling the docks, and that kind of thing?
Yeah. And what does it look like in a surveillance state?
Yeah.
Right? This is something that made this in our minds more than worthy of a 2-part episode. It seems This conspiracy in the Ludlow Massacre tells us a lot about the modern day, and we want to hear your stories of similar, oft-obscured history. One thing is for certain, from Hoffa to Colorado, from longshoremen to the Pinkertons, history is chock full of the stuff they don't want you to know. So hit us up with your stories from the U.S., from other countries, from any time in history. We try to be easy to find online.
Find us all over the internet on your platform of choice. We are Conspiracy Stuff on Facebook, where you can join our Facebook group. Here's where it gets crazy. Let us know what you think about the episodes. Talk with your fellow conspiracy realists. The floor is yours. We are also Conspiracy Stuff on X, FKA Twitter, as well as YouTube, where you can find video content galore for your enjoyment. On Instagram and TikTok, however, we are Conspiracy Stuff Show.
Hey, do you want to call us and tell us your thoughts? Like this thought from John Lawson, who was head of the United Mine Workers in 1915. Here we go. Quote, Mr. Rockefeller has missed the fundamental trouble in the coal camps. Democracy has never existed among the men who toil under the ground. The coal companies have stamped it out. Now Mr. Rockefeller is not restoring democracy. He's trying to substitute paternalism for it. I just thought that was a really interesting thought, an interesting quote. Do you have an interesting thought or quote or something you want to say to us? Call 1-833-STDWYTK. When you call in, give yourself a cool nickname and let us know on that message if we can use your message and your voice on the air. If you got more to say than can fit in a 3-minute voicemail, why not instead send us a good old-fashioned email? We are
the entities that read every piece of correspondence we receive. Be well aware yet unafraid. Sometimes the void writes back. Can't wait to hear your statements, your stories. Send the most chilling quotes from the dictators and patricians that you're aware of. Join us out here in the dark. Conspiracy at iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.